Hey everyone, welcome to another episode of the Caregiver Coffee Shop podcast. I am so excited to have this week's guest on the podcast with me. Her name is Tully Rose, but she goes by Tully, and she has a very complex story that I think is going to be so powerful to share with you. Obviously, on the podcast, we talk a lot about caregiving and motherhood, but this week I wanted to talk about a little bit more of a deeper complex caregiving perspective. Okay, we all been touched by someone in our life that has been touched by addiction, and lots of the times, guys, we focus on the perspective of the addicted person, right, of their struggle to get clean and sober. But and this is why I really resonated with Tully when she was sharing her story with me, and I invited her to be a guest on the podcast, is the perspective of the caregiving aspect. Okay, we think about caregiving, like, you guys know me, like, I have a former healthcare background in healthcare, long-term healthcare for 15 years, and I'm actively caring for my aging father and my husband, and I have a little girl. But there is another element, and I know some of you out there are caring for special needs children, but still, there's another element of caregiving that is lots of the time forgotten that I want to address today on today's episode, and that is caregiving for an addicted spouse or an addicted partner. And I appreciate Tully being brave and coming on the podcast to share her story, because this is not talked about. And I know this has to be such a complex situation that so many people deal with, because if someone's addicted, then there's definitely probably a significant other involved, maybe children, other family members. And the idea that I think that I really love that Tully really wants to talk about today, which I think is so important, is the aspect of being a caregiver and how you're being diligent about your behavior in terms of not enabling them in their addiction so they can recover. But again, it's so complex. There's no linear pathways on this journey of as a caregiver and also as a person that's dealing with addiction. But it's a topic that we need to talk about more. And I am so excited that Tully is here. So Tully, thank you for being on the Caregiver Coffee Chat podcast today.
Oh, I am I am honored to be here, excited to be here. Thank you for inviting me, and I'm ready. I'm ready to get started and dive into this conversation. I'm really hoping that there's some people out there that are going to resonate with what I'm saying, and maybe if it's not them, that it might be somebody that they know who is a partner of someone with addiction issues, and they'll just be able to further identify with their situation.
Absolutely. And I do want to say that, guys, like, whether it's this episode or any other episodes, even if you're not personally the one dealing with X, Y, and Z situation, caregiving for a toddler, trying to raise a toddler, caregiving for a spouse with a chronic illness under the age of 65, dealing with aging parents, dealing with addiction, or being a caregiver for an addicted partner or spouse, the information is here so people know. And so I really encourage you that if you are not following, liking, or subscribing to this podcast, or you know someone that needs to be, please share this, because this is the idea here, is that I want to share these intentional conversations with these amazing guests to give you guys the tools and resources that I never had when I started my own journey. And knowledge is power. And I think if there's anything, and I'm sure Tully would agree, when you're whatever season of journey that you're in, the best way to sometimes hindsight's 2020, we just don't know what we don't know. And so I want to make it clear that it is okay to ask questions. It's okay to voice that I'm not okay. It's okay to admit that I'm struggling. And it's
Absolutely.
okay to talk about hard topics, because by having these intentional conversations, we move the needle forward. We get better awareness for what these situations realistically do look like and how we can deal with them in a much healthier and respectful manner, right? Because, like Tully and I
Yes.
were talking about before we started this podcast episode, was that addiction in and of itself, I mean, that's a whole rabbit hole right there. Addiction is a touchy subject. And I know I personally have had friends that have dealt with addiction and lost their lives because of it. So it's not an easy topic. I grant you that. And the caregiving aspect in of itself is a touchy and a complicated subject. But
Oh,
before
yeah.
we get really deep into that, Tully, tell us a little bit about your story, and also what really spoke to you to share your story. Because I mean, we all have a why, and some people are even scared to even open their mouth and share their why. And for you, I can only imagine how intimidating, that's the only word I can think of right now, intimidating that step had to be to open up and be vulnerable to share your story.
Yeah, at times it is intimidating because you open yourself up to public opinion, and sometimes those public opinions are not the most positive. So that's definitely an aspect. But as far as my story, so that we don't make this entire episode about my story, I'm going to bullet point it for you and the listeners. Um, I was a caregiver for my elderly grandparents for over a decade of my life. And I, so that's a part of my codependency. So I was already set up to be a caregiver for someone in addiction. So I wanted to say that. I also grew up in an abusive household with a father who had addiction issues himself. So I watched that dynamic from a child's perspective. So again, really set me up to be in the position that I was later on. Um, I spent a lot of time caregiving also from a standpoint of, the way that I went out of my way for my friends, the way that I did a ton of volunteer work, which is a great thing. But I know that it was also there was a part of me that was trying to fill a void of never feeling like I was enough. So it's like I couldn't get enough of self-sacrifice. Um, so there was all these points in my life that I'm overgiving in the workplace, I'm overgiving outside of the workplace, I'm overgiving in the family, and there was a point that I just got sick of it. And I had been the type of person that my friends, sometimes strangers, could come to and tell their deepest, darkest secrets, worries, concerns to. And I just figured, how about I make something out of this? So that's when I started my coaching practice in late 2021. And, it's been a beautiful ride and challenging ride so far, but, I'm here to help and support those who are struggling with people pleasing, codependency, which codependency is part of what we're going to be talking to today, and toxic and abusive relationships. And so the reason why I decided to tell my story is because, well, thankfully, I'm not the first one to tell my story on a platform. There's many that came before me who, on social media, other places on the web, who are able to show me that telling your story can be a powerful thing. So I do attribute some of that bravery to the fact that I have witnessed others before me do it. And so I wanted to show up and tell my story and help other people in hopes that it would help someone else the way that other people's stories have helped me.
Awesome. I love that. And I think it's just so important to clarify too that that opening your mouth is the first step. Admitting that there's a reason why you've had X, Y, and Z behavior. And so for you to say that I didn't have a good stable background,
Right.
we go by what we have grown up. And I fortunately am blessed to have been born in a very Orthodox Christian, Christian
Mhm.
home. And I'm thankful for that. And I have the values. And I certainly want to pass that on to my daughter, but my husband wasn't. So, we know, only what you know. And then
Right.
it's really sometimes hard for people to really understand knowing anything else, especially in the realm of addiction, abuse, neglect.
Mhm. Yes.
That I can definitely understand where that people pleasing thing comes in, because you're looking for stability, you're looking for love, you're looking for
Yep.
support. And
Yes.
unfortunately, when you've been in those, when you only know those types of situations, you only know how to feel or how to attempt, I will say, to fill that void by unhealthy ways. And that does come along the line
Exactly.
of addiction, alcohol, drugs,
Yes.
prostitution. Sometimes it'll be like you said. I love that you even use volunteer work, because I do talk about with my moms
Yeah.
about, getting a break and doing something to nurture who they are, and and staying connected with past hobbies and passions of who they
Right.
were
Yes.
prior to becoming a stay-at-home mom and a spousal caregiver. And even like with me, I've had a career for 15 years, and now I'm really segueing into something different. And so I've had my own identity crisis. But um, the problem with addiction and caregiving for an addicted partner is that identity gets so clouded. It gets so clouded because you're trying to find it amid something that's unhealthy, that's
Right.
toxic,
Right.
excuse me, and doesn't really move you in the right direction at all. It just brings you down into a further
Right.
rabbit hole that you can't even get out of.
Right. Well, in a lot of cases, I'm not saying that applies to 100% of people, but the whole concept of codependency first came about in relation to addiction. Now we know that it can show up in other types of dynamics, but it was born out of the exact situation that I and so many others have been in. And so what ends up happening is before getting into a relationship like that, sometimes you are already trying to find your identity, just like I was. I'm constantly on the search, doing all these things, trying to find like, where do I fit in? Where is my value? And then you get into this relationship, and all of a sudden your entire identity becomes being a partner of someone in addiction. Most of your brain space is now uh, taken up by, you know, what is this person going to be like today? What is going to trigger them to use? What is going to trigger them to relapse? What time are they going to come home tonight? Are they going to come home drunk or high? Um, those types of things. What is going to set them off? What am I going to do when I discover a lie? Because the nature of addiction is deceit,
Mm-hmm.
because that person has to cover it up in order to keep the addiction going, which is what their brain is prioritizing.
Right, right. And then it becomes your whole world too, because you're on the edge
Yes.
of like, what am I going to be in for? What, like you said, even that,
Yes.
just that simple scenario of them coming home,
Oh,
what am
yeah.
I in for? Am I going to get hit? Am I going to get verbally abused at? Am I going to have to deal with um them not being lethargic and confused and out of it and being violent? Am I going to have to deal with them being angry because we had bills, I paid bills today, but because of their warped sense of self and brain and the way their brains, just thinking with, because they're so focused on that addiction, are they going to react in a negative way because of
Right.
that? So there's so many different things. So you're constantly on edge
Yes.
of, when is the shoe going to drop? Now,
Right.
as a caregiver for a spouse with a chronic illness, I will never try to compare the two, but it is similar. I can understand that, because I have that same on edge of, oh gosh,
Right.
is my husband about to have a seizure? Or is he okay?
Right.
Looking at my
Absolutely.
phone 50 times a day while he's at work to make
Yes.
sure I didn't miss anything.
Yes, absolutely.
So that there is that element with caregiving of being on the edge, of always being on constant
Absolutely.
alert, because you do not know what is coming down the pipeline.
That
And
is
that is a
exactly
hard
what it
way to
is.
live. And like you
That is the
say, it takes so much of your brain, and it's
It does.
exhausting.
It is. It is. And I really just wanted to jump in and make a distinction about abusive behavior. Now, um, talking about, so there were two parts to my relationship with the partner who struggled with addiction. One was the addiction, and one was abuse. And I want to make sure that everyone knows that those two things are separate. Just because someone is, so when I talk about abusive behavior, there's like low level, that there's a general low level type of abuse that every person with an addiction will display, which is like deceitfulness and kind of being manipulative, to get what they want because they're prioritizing the drug. But having an addiction does not inherently make you violent. And there are many, many people who have addiction who are not abusers. They do not display behavior that is categorized as domestic abuse. So, there's a great book, and I I don't know if this is the correct name of it, but I think it's called Why Does He Do That? And it's by somebody who studied, who actually had conversations with people who were in like abuser programs, who were court ordered to go to these programs. And that book also talks about addiction, and an abusive person chooses to be abusive, like to the level of domestic violence where there's verbal abuse, psychological abuse, financial abuse. And so at that level, that person is an abuser, and they're choosing to be abusive. That is separate from the drug addiction. But I will say, if you are dealing with somebody who is addicted and you're their partner, you are going to have to deal with deceit. They're going to be manipulative because their brain is prioritizing the drug. So I just wanted to make sure that there was that distinction, that I didn't necessarily worry about my partner coming home and being violent for the reason of, he had a temper, but that's separate from the addiction. I was more worried about, is he going to come home alive? When he comes home, what am I going to have to take care of? This person got into 2 separate car accidents, one in which he could have died. So waiting for phone calls like that, there were a few separate occasions where I had to take him to the hospital because of drug withdrawal. So just, what chaos is waiting around the corner for me, basically.
Exactly. And no, I'm glad. See, this is why I want to have this conversation.
Yes.
I love that you're sharing multiple layers and educating, because that's, again, it goes back to that piece. We don't know what we don't know.
Right.
And with addiction being complex in itself, and also being a caregiver for an addicted partner being complex in of itself, I think that's very important to highlight those things. And I love that you're explaining it. So, because people, again, they just see the outward appearance. They might see that they're moody because of the drug and the capacity in their brain of only being able to handle the need, the drive,
Correct.
the desire, constant desire for that drug. And they just don't have room for anything else. And like you say, abuse is a different, they can come together, they can blend, but they are separate. And I think it's so important that we give light to that, addiction can be separate, abuse can be separate, but they can come together, and it can be even of a worse of a firestorm. But either way, there's complex layers to how you're going to deal with it. And there's complex ways of how it's going to present itself. Everyone's different. So, and like you said, not all addicts are abusive, and not
Correct.
all abusers are necessarily addicts. They have
Correct.
That abuse came from something else. And I think that I like that you highlighted too, just that I resonate with that point of wondering if they're going to come home alive.
Yes.
With my husband, if he has a seizure and he hits his head and does something like that, it could kill him,
Right.
And people have died of seizures in their sleep, SUDEP, sudden unexplained death by an epileptic seizure. That happens. We had that happen with someone at his work. So it's scary. It's scary. You're on edge. You want to make sure that you react in a very fast way. It's hard. I don't like leaving him home alone, but there's times I have to, and I hate doing that because of just the dynamic I'm in. I have to do certain things, and it's just hard. I can't always have somebody here. I would like it, but I can't always have someone here. So it's complicated. It's complicated. And this, I can only imagine how even more aggravating that is when they're out there on the streets. I'm just, besides a car wreck, the thing that came to mind for me is just, say they're trying to a drug deal goes wrong. They're trying to get their addictions, get their next fix, and they're trying to do the transaction, and it goes bad. Someone pulls a knife, someone pulls out a gun, or there's a fight. And obviously, since they're on the street and probably maybe don't always have their cell phone or identification on them, they could just be killed in the gutter and no one would know until it's too late. And then and then what a horrible way for the caregiver, if you're, in that situation, getting that phone call. You talk about nasty phone calls, finding out that your significant other has been killed, in a drug deal gone wrong, or a shootout or something. So that's a real thing too. Cause I mean, that's the other part too. I think that these people that are addicted, they're so addicted. There's nothing more important to them than getting that fix. And some people that they deal with to get it, obviously, in, not legal ways, because drugs, are illegal. So getting it illegally, they can deal with, they deal with people who are probably not the best people to be around in, and also in parts of cities where they can probably get away with it, or they try to get away with it. So you're dealing with bad people, but then you're dealing in a bad part of town. So
So it also depends on the substance, right? Because there are alcoholics, you can get alcohol anywhere. You don't have to go meet up with somebody, like in an alleyway or whatever, to get it. So it really depends on what the substance is. In my case, it was drugs, it was opioids. So opioids are legal. They're legal, but not unless prescribed. So then you have this whole, marketplace of people that will sell them. And so it's also, I think, important to state that people at very high levels of wealth and notoriety in society are addicted and use. And this is a type of thing that touches not just the poorer or neighborhoods, dangerous neighborhoods. This is just recently, trying to think of his name, Chandler, the person who played Chandler on on Friends. So I mean, he is a celebrity, probably multi-millionaire, and his story was so compelling because he struggled with not only alcoholism but also opioid addiction, and it nearly took his life. And so, that's the thing I think that everyone needs to know, is that this is something that can touch your life. It does not matter your age, your race, your societal status, what your bank account balance is. This can happen with anyone, any walk of life.
Exactly. And I think that's so important to touch on, is that the things that we're talking about here, obviously motherhood and caregiving for a spouse is not everyone's going to have that situation, but addiction, it's really across the board. It happens to young kids, it happens to older adults, and like you say, it happens to every class of people, and every ethnicity. Anyone can go down this path. And so I think it's a universal conversation that we need to talk about. We need to have those hard conversations and just call it for what it is. It is complex, and there's a lot of extenuating circumstances with each situation, but we still need to have those conversations and just make it okay that we can talk about these topics in a respectful way, like what we're doing here now, and just raise awareness that this is a problem. There's always still that debate of like control substance, of the system being broken, and that's a whole another rabbit hole we can get in of itself. But more importantly, we just want to give, I think for me, from what I'm hearing in this and feeling in this conversation, I just want to give a light to the caregivers who are in this situation, to let them be seen, that they are seen. Caregiving is lots of times, no one would know that, we don't go around with a tag on our head saying we're a caregiver, or we're a mom, or have a former addict, or we're caregiving for an addict, that type of thing. But it is an invisible role, and it can be an isolating role, because we're doing it on our own in our homes behind closed doors. And it's tough. And for people, even as well-meaning as families can be, sometimes they don't see everything. That you look at a person, they look fine. They don't look like anything is wrong with them, but if they only knew. And that can feel really disempowering. That can feel really isolating. And the thing is that we need, as human beings and human bodies with emotions, the way that God designed us, is that we actually do better when we're in community. Back to the Stone Age times, we lived in tribes, and you would be cast out if you didn't follow the rules, and you would not survive. So more so than anything, you just need that mental, emotional, and spiritual support when you're going through a situation like that. And there's stuff, I know there's stuff out there for addicts, but I think what I want to highlight with this situation and conversation we're having is let's make sure that the caregivers for the addicts are seen and that they're being supported, because they're in a rock and a hard place. And people lots of times, again, do not see that they're between the hard and the rock place. They just see the person who's sick and addicted with the addiction. But what about the caregiver, the spouse or partner that's on the other end of
Right.
this? Let's
Right.
make sure that they're being seen, that he or she is being seen, because,
Hmm.
and because and again, with going with every class, it can be male or female. Okay. There's no gender discrimination here. Addiction can happen
Right.
to either or. And
Yes.
so how can we make sure that he or she is being seen while they're navigating this really complex role?
Yeah, definitely. And it is extremely isolating because something you mentioned earlier was about caring for somebody with a chronic illness. Sometimes you don't want to leave the house, right? So as somebody who is caregiving and supporting a person with addiction, so I can speak for myself, but I know I'm speaking for others and that have been in my position, is that I stopped really wanting to go hang out with my friends because that would kind of, that really frees the person up to do whatever they want to do. And so I've always been a very independent person. I would say more introverted person, meaning I like my alone time, and I need to energize after social situations. But when it came to this relationship, I kind of became glued to his side, or if I wasn't at his side, I was glued to my phone because I wanted to have some sort of control in the situation. And so that is something that contributed to me sort of withdrawing from my community support um, at that during that time. And not only that, but as time went on, there was so much chaos that would come into my life as a result of this person's addiction that some of my friends kind of got sick of it,
Mm-hmm.
and
Yep.
they
Mm-hmm. Yeah, they don't want to
so
deal with it anymore. They
they don't
know
want to hear
it's
about it. They don't want to
it's
deal
and
with it.
that's the thing. It's like caregiving, guys. That's why I say caregiving is a marathon. It's not a sprint.
Yes, yes.
I'm starting at a younger age. I started at, let's see, I'm 37 now, so 35 when my husband,
Yeah.
35, no, 30, 30, yeah, 34 to 35 is when my husband got sick. And my
Mm,
husband was only about 52, 53. So he was
mm,
relatively young. And,
mm.
again, it's before the cap of age where you anticipate caregiving,
Right,
at the age
right.
of 65. When your kids are grown, they're
Yep,
graduated from high school, they're starting to pursue their own passions and ambitions, and it's
right.
just back to you two.
Yep.
It happened a little sooner for us, and so it's a
Yes.
marathon.
Yes.
And
Yes.
um that people do get tired of it, and that's, I think, and I do resonate with that. You get so tired of opening your mouth to some extent, of saying, because they ask, how are you? It's like, are you really legitly asking that question, or is it just a surface question?
Right.
Because as
Do
we
I
get to
tell
that
you how I
point,
really
do
feel?
I tell you crap that I'm really feeling? Exactly, because as caregivers, we're dealing with a lot mentally, emotionally, and spiritually. We really are.
Yes.
And like any human being, we have to release. And I personally, with practicing my faith, I pray, I read my Bible, I do devotional, and I do a lot of journaling and inner work. That's really where I'm at. And I have joined a mom's group at church, which has helped. But still, one does need to have intentional conversation with somebody that actually gets it, right?
Yes.
And I think that's what's so cool about your role and my role. It's a little different dynamic, but it's still the
Yeah.
same thing. Is we're trying to help people be seen and go, it's okay if you need to shout, if you need to vent, if you just need to cry and release. This is a safe place for you to do that with me. You can do that with me, and it will be okay. So, and we'd rather you do that than not.
Right. Right.
So,
Absolutely. I think that it's important to have some kind of friendships, I think, to be able to talk this out. But at the same time, there might be a limit to what your
mhm,
friends can do for you just because of, they're not equipped to deal with the situation. And also, being that they are your friends, they have a certain level of emotional investment in you, which can sometimes make it hard to be consistently supportive. Now, I'm not giving an excuse to anybody to, to just like back off and not be someone's friend because they're going through something like this. But I think it's important to also maybe look at other forms of community support. So you mentioned mom groups. Now, for those that are in situations like mine, there's Alcoholics Anonymous, and then there's Al-Anon, which is the for people, family members, and partners that are dealing with somebody who's an alcoholic. There's Nar-Anon, which is Narcotics Anonymous, and then there's the Nar-Anon. NA, and then Nar-Anon, I think, is the family groups and supportive. So basically, if there's a group for someone with addiction, then there's also a group for those that love the person with addiction.
That's going through the addiction.
There's also Codependence Anonymous, CODA. So but there are other types. So AA and NA and CODA, they have a very specific, they use the 12 steps, even if you're on the other side of it. And so for me personally, it didn't really work very well for me. I didn't, some of the 12-step process just made me feel a little bit more like I had to take some of the blame in the person's addiction. Like, I don't know, maybe it was the person who was leading the group, but it just didn't end up working well for me. But that's not saying that it won't work well for someone else. But there are a variety, even if it's not a group like Al-Anon or something of that CODA. There are other groups that have other types of structures that can be of support. And so
absolutely.
I think just, not only relying on your friends is also important, because there really is only so much that they can carry for you during that time. They're just not well equipped to do so. The other professionals in the field that lead these types of groups are.
Right. And I love that you touched on that, because everyone's different. Like, how we absorb and process and grieve and release is all supposed to be different and unique. With that being said, there needs to be you've got to find a resource that works for you. Like she just said, the 12-step program did not work for her. And I will be, just a side note, guys, I will be sure to make sure Tully gives me all those links, and we will leave them into the description box below for you guys if you're watching this on Anchor, Spotify, or my YouTube channel. Okay. So you guys have resources. Okay.
Yes.
But also too, like, if even just, I know for me with my journey, and I know even with my parents when they were dealing, because my dad started caregiving for my mom at a pretty young age. She was in her 20s when she started sick, and she was chronically ill for 50 years before she passed away. So
sorry for your loss.
That they used, and what I have used as well, is counseling. Here, and I harp all the time. So guys, you've heard me talk about this before, is counseling and or a therapist is a resource, because here's the thing. Sometimes, like, we're going back to that piece, your friends and your family only have a certain amount of capacity of what they can handle with the extenuating circumstance that you were going through, right? And they are trained and they have referrals and they can give you medicine. There's no shame, okay? Like, I was on anxiety and depressive meds in my early 20s because I was going through a really hard time at that time, and I needed it, and I don't regret that. And sometimes you just need to have a safe place. That's another safe place where you can go, where they're trained to be a third-party, non-biased person, and they can help you with that situation. I would also encourage you to look at, I know personally for us at our church, which I'm really thankful for, is that we have a Celebrate Recovery program on Tuesday nights. They have a dinner, and they have a program that's kind of like or like some of the other things that Tully mentioned. And we keep that going 365 or all 52 weeks, I should say, because it's once a week. But even during the holidays, we keep it going, because for like I know Tully knows, for people with addiction, they need that accountability, that once a week, to keep going so they don't fall off the bandwagon. So look at churches, community centers in your communities. I'm sure they have something similar to like what my church does. That could be an awesome resource too. And then And lots of times they're free. So I believe ours is free. So, if that is a struggle, don't let that stop you. Look at counseling, and also check out, I will say too, if you're in the counseling or therapy need, my church, I mean, not all churches or congregations of faith will, or community centers will, but still check it out. You never know. Our church has started a clinic too for the gap of the population in our community where they don't quite qualify for Medicaid, but they're definitely not at the point where they can handle, because of extreme circumstances, they cannot afford traditional health insurance to be able to access those services, but we want to make sure they do. And we have a learning center coming too. So look around in your community for nonprofits, charities, and that offer similar services like what we've talked about, but are cheaper and are maybe in a smaller group too. I'm thinking too, that might not be so overwhelming is it's more one-on-one and it's in a smaller setting. So it might be a little less intimidating as you're segueing out of that period of just being isolated, and then suddenly being bombarded with all these people after not being around people and not sharing as consistently as you may have had before, prior to this situation of caregiving or addiction or motherhood or caregiving, whatever your situation is. Either way, the resources apply to both.
Oh, yes. Yes. So I'm glad you brought that up. So there's a lot of different places to get support through your church, through different organizations you might be a part of, the meetings, therapy. These are all things that can be utilized when you're ready for them. But I think the first step is really just being aware of the fact that when you are caregiving and caring for, even if you don't want to call it caregiving, but I think after listening to this episode, your audience, you will see that it is in fact caregiving, but caring for somebody who is in addiction, if they're your partner, is it becomes an all-consuming type of thing, and it becomes a situation where you are not just caring for them, but you might actually many times end up enabling them. So you look at the difference here between caring for a child. A child needs a caregiver. They need somebody to care for them, literally, to keep to live, right?
Right. Absolutely.
And then chronic illnesses and elderly, right? They a lot of times have needs that are kind of sometimes at the same level of a child. They need someone to care for them. But there are many situations. The reason why it's called codependency is because there is a mutual dependency. One person is reliant on the other to get their needs met, which would be the person in addiction. And then the other person is reliant on providing and saving and rescuing that person. And the reason why it's unhealthy is because in order for it to meet the level of codependency, there has to be a situation where the person could help themselves, but they choose not to. So this is not a child. This is not somebody with chronic illness. This is somebody who could do more to help themselves and are choosing not to. And then the person on the other end, the partner, many times ends up enabling that behavior. So if you are in a situation with someone with addiction, you are, number one, dealing with somebody who is emotionally unavailable. If somebody is in active addiction, they are emotionally unavailable. Their priority is the substance, or, let's say it could be like a porn addiction, gambling, whatever it is. That is their priority. They are emotionally unavailable, number one. Number two, if they don't want to get sober, you can't do anything about it, really. I mean, yes, I demanded a couple of times that my ex go to rehab, and he did, but he didn't go because he wanted to. He went because he wanted to stay together, or he wanted to keep a roof over his head. Those types of things. So the person is emotionally unavailable. And if they don't, they have to be the ones to want to get sober. And so recognizing that, if you're in that situation, what am I doing to float the relationship because the person isn't showing any signs, either they're not verbally saying it or their actions are not proving that they want to get sober and change the situation. How am I filling in the gaps for that situation? What am I doing to enable that situation to continue to be that way? Maybe I'm paying more the bulk of the bills and just basically kind of cleaning up different messes, and not, it could be a literal mess, but when I say messes, I mean, car accidents and dealing with insurance hiking up, and taking the person to the hospital, and maybe taking care of them at home because they either overdid it or they're going into withdrawal, making sure there's enough groceries in the home, those types of things. Like, how am I filling in the gaps for this person when they could take more action for themselves, but they are not?
Right. And I think the word that instantly comes into my brain when you shared all that, boundaries.
Yes.
Okay. I know we don't like boundaries, but we need boundaries. And as caregivers, it goes to the heart of caregiving. Boundaries. You need to have boundaries in terms of how you take care of yourself. You need to have boundaries, though, but more importantly, like in the situation that we're talking about in terms of addiction, is boundaries in terms of how much you will give to them. Yes. Because your reaction of like helping them not go into debt, helping them to keep their bellies full, helping them, X, Y, and Z, you name it, clean up the messes, is what is enabling them. They'll just know, oh, she's going to cover. Oh, if I get another accident, she'll pay the bill. Oh, if I get hungry, she'll fill the fridge with groceries. Oh, if I get hurt, she'll take me to the hospital.
Yeah.
There's only so much, because here's the thing, guys. When you're going through a caregiving situation, it's traumatic. Yes. It's causing you mental, emotional, and spiritual trauma.
Yes.
Now, it might not show its head right away. I've had my own issues with anger and frustration, and that's come to a head for me in this year. So that's why I've been really doing a lot of intensive work with my Christian life coaches to work through that, because it has really hit me hard. 2021 was all about the physical care, because I went all of 2021, undiagnosed with my IBS. And so I was sick. I was literally sick, and I was just undiagnosed and going through multiple doctors and all those things. So the physical health took a head in the 2021. 2022 has been really focusing on my spiritual self-care and my mindset and the inner work of, dealing with the anger and the frustration of everything. Because, when you're caregiving, you're grieving a lot. You're grieving the life that you anticipated having.
Yes.
You're grieving
the disappointment.
Anticipatory grief. Yes. And it hits its rear head. It will rear its head, guys, really hard. It may not be right away. For me, my caregiving, my husband got sick in December 2019. He officially got diagnosed in July of 2020, and I simultaneously officially quit my job. I'd been extending medical leave, and then 2021 hit. I was sick all year, and then now it's hitting the anticipatory grief, I think, is hitting me hardest now in 2022. So it can come later. And so that's why boundaries are so critical here. And I know it's easier said than done, especially if you're dealing with a very complex caregiving role that's not understood, not advocated enough, not talked about enough, or really put in the limelight enough. It's hard. Okay. But you need to listen to what Tully's saying, and you need to listen to what I'm saying. Boundaries are critical. Now, I know we love our loved ones and we don't want anything bad to happen to them, but sometimes we got to let them sink before they can swim. And like Tully said, like that situation with her ex, he went to rehab, but why did he go to rehab? Because he didn't want to lose a roof over his head, or totally paying the bills, or totally giving the groceries. she was still enabling him by doing that choice. Probably what Tully should have done is let him sink. Do we want to see our loved one that
Eventually,
we
that
care
is what
about?
happened.
Yeah. Do we want to let them sink, or do we enjoy seeing them sink? Of course not.
No, it's
But that's the hard
very,
part.
very
But
hard.
still, that's why boundaries are so important.
Right.
Okay.
Right.
You have to say
Absolutely.
no sometimes. Saying no is the most powerful boundary. If you get nothing else from this call, saying
Right.
boundaries sometimes is the most important thing that you can do for yourself as a caregiver. Saying no to taking on the extra project if you don't have the mental capacity of doing it. Saying no to enabling your, I can't even say that word, enabling your addicted partner. Saying no to not to saying no to filling up your calendar so much that you have no time for yourself. Saying no to not losing your identity of
Right.
who you are and making that time that you prioritize for yourself to stay connected to that person you were before the addiction happened, before the caregiving role hit, before your spouse got sick, if that's you, or
Yeah.
even before you became a mom. Identity is everything. Okay.
Right.
But if you want to protect that identity, you need to have boundaries.
Yes. Yes. Absolutely. With boundaries, and this applies across the board, but especially because of the situation with the partner in addiction, is that it is saying no, but it is also, if you do this, then this is what I'm going to do to protect myself. And that's where a lot of people fail, is because they basically almost cry wolf. They stand up on their soapbox and they say, I'm not going to take that. You can't do that anymore. But they don't say, if you do this, like for example, if I find out that you are using drugs in our house, then I'm going to leave, or I'm going to ask you to leave, or I'm going to get a hotel for the night because I don't want to be around that. So you decide what is the violation, and then you decide what are you going to do in response to that violation to protect your well-being, and make sure that it's not an ultimatum and it's not a punishment. It is to protect your well-being. And so what ends up happening is you spend a lot more time in the first step, which is saying, this is what I don't find acceptable. And you just say that over and over again, and nothing happens, nothing changes. But you have to take that next step. And that is the hardest step, is to
Right.
enforce the boundary and do it
Exactly.
every time.
Mm-hmm.
Every time.
Yeah. 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 Action creates clarity. And sometimes, it takes, putting your foot down, not just verbally, but actively doing something. You have to be active in how you say you're going to do X, Y, and Z. So, you do have to protect your welfare, and I like what my coach says. She says to say, what are you saying no? What do you need to say no
Yeah.
to say yes to? I know that's
Right.
cliche as it is, but guys, it's true. What do you need to say no to say yes to?
Oh,
And I
yeah.
think that's so important. I know it's easier said than done, but man, it is so important that we
Oh,
do
yeah.
that.
Absolutely. I think I read something somewhere that was very similar to that phrase that says, when you're saying no to something, you're saying yes to something else. When you're saying yes to something, you're saying no to something else. And that is just like the law of the world. So
Mm-hmm.
being
Mm-hmm.
really aware of what you're saying yes to and what you're saying no to, so that you know what you're making space for and what you're not making space for, is incredibly important. And I also wanted to touch on the grief aspect of the situation that you mentioned earlier. Yes, anticipatory grief exists with caregiving. I would say that it's a lot more prevalent than is talked about, and it's something that a lot of people grapple with, and they don't even know that that's what's going on, that really they're grieving. And so with somebody with addiction issues, the grief is multi-layered. So you're grieving, possibly, like if you were in a relationship before the person either relapsed or started their addiction, then you might be grieving the person that they were before the addiction took place, like really longing for the days where this person wasn't on this road. Or maybe you're grieving the fact that the person could very well end up killing themselves, either through getting in a car accident or overdosing or, drug dealing gone bad
Yeah,
type of
drug deal gone
situation.
bad. Yeah,
So,
absolutely.
um, and in a partner situation, I can speak for myself, is not only was I grieving, well, my ex had kind of like a lifelong almost addiction. So it was part of in the 90s when opioids was first really becoming a big thing and they were being prescribed like candy. My ex had a knee surgery and he got told me, I didn't see it, but he said he got this huge bottle of hundreds of Vicodin, and that was age 17, and that's where it began for him. So it didn't show up after we got together, but there was a part of me that was still what I imagined the relationship was going to be like before I really started to notice all these behaviors, in the beginning stages of the relationship when I didn't know the signs. So
Right.
I was grieving the hope for what could be, the love that I had thought was going to be in my future, the partner that I thought I was going to have, and grieving the very real possibility that this person is going to kill themselves later in life, whether it be sooner or later because of their substance abuse, and there's nothing I can do about it. And grieving the almost grieving also like the person that I know that they could have been had this addiction not been present. So there's so many layers to this. It is a traumatic experience. I mean,
Absolutely.
I witnessed my ex on the brink of death a good amount of times. That is a traumatic experience. So there's so much grief and pain in these situations, and um, bringing them to light can allow you to see that you are responding normally to an abnormal situation. It's not your
Right.
fault. You didn't cause the addiction, and you definitely can't cure it. You are simply responding normally to an abnormal situation.
Right. And I love that because in my prompt method I teach preparing for the unexpected, reaching out for support, getting organized at home, managing your busy schedule, prioritizing self-care. The T is very important. Telling your story to heal and to inspire.
Yeah.
Okay. That's what I want this to be. Okay. We're not trying, anytime I have these intentional conversations with my guests, guys, it is never from a place of malice or vengeance. Okay. It's not telling you that you're doing it
Right.
wrong. I just want you to do it better. And I'm speaking to the
Yeah.
choir here. I'm actively going through this too. I just got to tell you, I'm doing an intensive program with my Christian life coaches this year because I need it. I know I need it, and I'm getting replugged back in now that COVID is, well, it's still there, but it's at least to the point now where we can have things opened up again. And I'm back in church twice a week, for our Wednesday night classes, and my daughter goes to her program and I get my
Mm-hmm.
mom's group, and then we do church on Sundays. So, I'm feeding myself that way, and creating those boundaries of those are non-negotiable times where I nurture myself, and daily time too, first thing in the morning before I do any work. So, boundaries are important. But again, caregiving is not your fault. My husband has an illness that 20 to 30% of the population will, within their lifetime, will get without any medical history. They don't necessarily have to have, you don't have to have medical history as a child or in your family tree to contract epilepsy. It can just happen. And there's no way of knowing 9 times out of 10 how you got it and what happened. Could it be from a traumatic surgery or brain injury or something kooky like that? Maybe, but there's just no way to know. So you just have to deal with it. And for me, the anticipatory grief was the ability that, okay, I had a daughter. Is she going to get it now and later in life? And my husband cannot be home alone with her anymore. So now I have to grieve, I'm the default parent. He can't do certain things with her anymore. An adult needs to be here when he's with her. He can't drive anymore. He can't, work 48 plus hours a week like you used to. So like the amount of money we have coming in is gone for right now. So
Mm-hmm.
it's different. There's, and like even just, we had planned on maybe having another baby, and that's out the window now
Mm,
because of,
mm.
we
Oh,
just
so
don't.
much grief. Yeah.
Yeah, because I had complications with our daughter, and I wanted to go for a VBAC. That's not going to happen. So there's many layers of grief when you're in a caregiving journey, and when it hits, whether it's a chronic illness, whether it's addiction, there's complex. There we go, complex layers to this journey and to this role. And again, I want to reiterate too, from my standpoint, with what I teach, guys, it's not your fault. Okay.
Right.
Chronic illness is something that that doesn't mean that if you do X, Y, and Z, you're going to get this. It doesn't work like that. Unfortunately, with chronic illnesses, a lot of times with some people, if they have a compromised immune system, and if you have one, it leads to multiple. And that's very much me. I got hypothyroidism when I was in my early 20s, and then I segued into my early 30, mid to latter 30s with IBS. It happens.
Mm-hmm.
Do I hope I never get any more? I hope, but I can't guarantee that that will be my cup of tea. So it is what it is. So what I hope that you guys will take away from this episode is that you're not alone. It's not your fault. You're not doing it wrong. You just don't know what you don't know. Okay. It doesn't make you a bad person. It doesn't make you a bad mother. It doesn't make you a bad spouse or partner. It just means you need to educate yourself to be able to handle these complex situations, with the right resources and the right support. So, Tully, I have two more questions for you. One,
Sure.
what are 3 tips that you would like to give our listeners who are dealing with a complex addiction, caregiving type role? And then 2, where can we find more of Tully Rose?
Sure. So three tips that I have for anyone who has a partner in addiction is, one, get educated on addiction. Just get educated on how it begins, how it what behaviors to look out for, and the way that it affects families and societies, so that kind of get a good idea of what you're dealing with. So awareness is key. And second is to decide what you want, because if it's okay if you want to stay, and it's okay if you want to leave, but both of those are going to require that you get really honest with yourself and set some boundaries. So figure out what it is that you want. If nothing changed in this situation a year from now or 6 months from now, would you be okay with that? And the third is to remember that you cannot control this situation. You can't. It is not something that you didn't cause it, and you can't cure it. And so just reminding yourself that you don't have control over whether this person uses or whether they want to stop using.
Right.
So, yeah. So awareness, decide what you want, and know that this is not something that you can control.
I love that. So, and then where can we find more of you? Because I'm sure there's going to be some people, I hope, that are listening to this episode that will finally know that you exist and can help. Because like I said, addiction is hard. Caregiving is hard, but caregiving for an addicted partner is really hard. And it's not talked about enough. So I want people to connect with my girl and get the help that they need.
Yeah, thank you. So my website is tullyrose.com. So there's there where you can find me, but I'm on all social channels, TikTok, Facebook, Instagram, YouTube, at the handle at I am Tully Rose.
I love it. So, well, Tully, this has been a great call. We've talked about some really deep things on this
Yes.
podcast episode. So this last question, I've been having so much fun with my guests and answering. So you can spin it either way. So the question is, what is something that we have talked about either in our conversation we've had today, or maybe something throughout your journey that has just really resonated with you, really stuck with you, that's really inspired you to just keep going?
Mm, yeah. I think that what has inspired me to keep going is actually the impact that certain people have had on my life to support me, to listen to me. I know that there have been pivotal moments in my life where an unexpected kindness just broke me wide open, just really softened my heart and reminded me that there are good people in the world. There is there are people who it made me believe in humanity again. And so because of that, I I know that what I do, although I
Mhm.
don't know how many people, we never know sometimes how many lives that we touch by what we do. But I know that because I've had those experiences of my own, that there is a possibility that I could be involved in one of those pivotal moments for somebody else. And that's why I do what I do.
Amen. I'm right there with you. I remember my business coach, she pushed me hard for a whole quarter, like, you need to niche down, you need to niche down. I went through before I found my business coach. So I found my business coach, Faith Mara. Shout out to my girl Faith, in October of 2020. But I had started my blog, my first website blog, back in May of 2020. And I just struggled from May to October to figure
Mm.
out what to do. I just did not know what I was doing. And then by the time I started working with Faith in October through December, I kept just coming back, call after call after call. She's like, I'm struggling. And she's like, you need to niche down. You need to niche down. Finally in December, I finally decided, okay, I'm going to do some research. And there was one, and I was hitting a crossroads too, where I was just struggling in my own journey. So I was needing support. And the one thing that came up was, you know what? There's stuff for caregiving. There's stuff for special needs kids. There's stuff for caring for an aging parent. There's stuff for caring for your spouse after the age of 65. And there's stuff for for women who have made a pre-planned choice prior to having children, to be a stay-at-home mom. There's support for that. But what about if you're a former healthcare worker or workforce, mom? Your spouse gets sick under the age of 65 and you have a toddler at home.
Mm.
I could not
Yeah.
find anything. So that's why I created my own niche out of that. So it's a dual niche. So I love that I get to target both caregivers and spousal caregivers, aging parents, now that I'm in kind of a sandwich generation situation now that we lost my dad after my mom's death. And I'm caregiving for my spouse. So I love that too. I love that it worked out that God provided a way for me to still use my healthcare knowledge. So it's different than what I thought I would be doing it for the rest of my life, but I'm still being able to use those things. Like, cause being a CNA, you learn to take vitals, you learn to triage, you learn
Hmm.
to, just kind of look for like when things are off and document progress notes, things like that, documentation. Um, aides don't do a lot of handwritten stuff. It's more verbal communication report, but still the same thing. We're documenting and reporting to the next person what we see. So the team's in the loop and, mentioning things to what we see to the rest of the team, the doctors, the nurses, the PT and OT staff, and the average person doesn't understand how to do that. So I think it's cool that we're both in a very unique niche where we are getting to target and serve people who lots of times are forgotten and they fall through the cracks, and that's not okay. So we're going to make sure they don't fall through the cracks.
Right,
So.
exactly. And if there's any entrepreneurs or aspiring entrepreneurs that are listening, is that what Melissa and I did is we repurposed skills and experience that we already have. You do not have to reinvent the wheel. You do not have to go back and
Amen.
get a certification. You don't have to go back to school and wait until you have this much more knowledge. Use what you know.
Absolutely, yes, use what you know. My business coach is speaking through you. I love it. Yeah. So um yeah, don't reinvent the wheel. Use what you have. Work harder, not work smarter, not harder. Okay.
Yes.
I'm definitely in a season like that where I'm just loving these I ditched the blog. I did that. I was on a Bluehost WordPress uh website when I started my business, and it drove me up the wall. I don't code. I had to link so many pieces
Yep.
of software to kind of link everything, and it just drove me up the wall. So all-in-one platform is how your girl runs. So I love my
Yep,
Podia site now,
same.
so I can find everything, and I tell you what, and then just using this too now, just
Yep.
as my content wheel. So I love it. So don't reinvent the wheel. Don't overthink. Listen to what Tully and I are saying. If we can
Yes.
take our unique stories and spin a business out of it and and inspire and help people, you can do the same thing. Now, is
Yes,
it
you
for
can.
everybody? Not
No.
everybody. But it feels like it's like the Lord's laying it on your heart, like you got that nudge, that desire. It's there for a reason. It's there for a reason. So Tully, before we go, is there any
Yeah.
other resources or paid or free offer that you want to pitch to let our listeners know that might help them if they do have a specific need right now?
Sure. I just started a podcast myself. It's called the People Pleaser Podcast. So you can find, I don't have that many episodes yet because I just started, but that's where you can get information about people pleasing, codependency, and toxic and narcissistic relationships. I am taking clients for 2023. So if anybody is looking
Yay!
to, yeah, to really level up and they want somebody to partner with them and to strategize how they can be more authentically themselves, then I'm your girl for that. And I guarantee that there will be changes in your life and you will have a shift. And so that is also something that I'm offering.
Awesome. Yeah. Well, I will leave all of the links that we've talked about for resources, Tully's work. And I will be included in the description box below, whether you're watching on Spotify, Anchor, YouTube, or Apple. And then also, or my YouTube channel, and also if you are a mom or a caregiver struggling right now and you need some backup support, your girl's got you. I am offering free 30 to 60 minute support calls. There will be a link below in the description box as well. And also doors are opening soon to my Finding Your Balance one-on-one coaching program if you'd actually like some more long-term one-on-one coaching, and a link will be put in the description box below. But guys, listen, caregiving's hard. Motherhood's hard. Dealing with an unexpected situation of caregiving or an addiction is hard. That's kind of a common thing. Like I said, at the beginning of this interview, we've all been touched by somebody that has dealt with addiction. Okay. We may not be in the caregiving role, but we've been touched by it. And knowledge is power. So if you are struggling with motherhood, caregiving, spousal caregiving, adjusting to leaving your career and having to start over because of X, Y, and Z, if you're struggling with healing from a codependency or abuse or a relationship that involved drugs and alcohol, addiction of some sort, porn, whatever it is, Tully and I got you. We want to help you.
Yes.
Okay. And 2022 has been a challenging year for you. And I can't promise that there'll be no bumps in the road for 2023. But I want you to take a deep breath, realize that you're not alone. None of this is your fault. Things happen that are just out of your control. Chronic illness is something that's out of our control too. We can't control it. But what you can control is how you react to it. And so my prayer for you guys in 2023 is that you guys will open your mouth, set those boundaries that we talked about, and move forward with the different types of resources and support that you need, whether it's from my girl Tully, whether it's from me, or maybe it's somebody else. Either way, I want you to be advocating for yourself and setting those intentional boundaries so you get what you need. Okay. Well, I hope you guys enjoyed this episode. Please feel free to like, subscribe, and follow me on all of the platforms, and be sure to leave any questions below. If you guys have any questions specifically for me or Tully, definitely leave them below. And also maybe any ideas for other episodes you would like to see on the podcast, definitely leave those below. But anyway, thank you guys for watching. Thank you guys for listening. Tully, thank you so much for being a guest. I have loved having you on the podcast. And stay tuned for
Thank you.
another. You're welcome. And stay tuned, guys, for another episode of the Caregiver Coffee Shop podcast with your girl, Melissa Miller. Take care, guys.